Tears and Tears, Part 3, by Joe Mad Dog Sullivan. Forest Park, Queens, New York. Since I had about 7 hours to wait before I could meet my sister, I walked up to Forest Park, where I always went as a kid whenever I ran away from home or any other place. There was a giant crater, which was now all dried up and dead looking. It was once a pretty pond where all the kids used to go fishing for catfish or guppies along the pond's edge with their mother's strainer. Mom used to have the cloth type strainer. It really worked well because the guppies wouldn't pop back out as they did with the shallow metal ones. I always managed to get it. Mom used to have the cloth type strainer. It really worked well because the guppies wouldn't pop back out as they did with the shallow metal ones. I always managed to get it cleaned. Those guppies really smelled, and back in the kitchen cabinet before it would be needed the following morning. I sat on the embankment that surrounded the moonlight crater. I recall the strange sense of loss I felt looking down on that empty space that was slowly beginning to fill up with broken bottles, cans, and all type of garbage. What happened to all the water? What became of all the guppies and catfish? Why must everything change? Why does everything have to die? I thought of my father, who at 13 I had just begun to know and emulate. He was still a young man and the best looking man in the whole neighborhood. He wasn't old. Why didn't nobody else's father die? It all happened so fast. It seemed like only a month before we were supposed to go to Yankee Stadium, but he got sick and couldn't go. I didn't feel too bad because he told me there would be plenty of other times. You just wait. I never thought of people dying, especially my father, who in my mind was the closest thing to Superman that there was. I never even thought about death, so how was I supposed to know it was a serious thing? 13 years old, 1952, parochial school. About 2 weeks after my father got a little sick, I was playing baseball in a vacant lot across from St. Elizabeth's, where I attended grammar school. It was supposed to be my turn to bat next, so I was really upset and embarrassed when I heard my mother call my name. I wanted to run up to the plate quickly and get my swings, but my mom spoke in authority. When my mom spoke in authority, everything was dropped. "Joesph, come over here," she commanded, leaving no doubt in my mind that she meant now. "Aw, Ma," I started to protest, but when I looked up and saw the tears coming from her eyes, I was speechless. I never saw my mother cry before. "What's wrong, Mom?" I asked, feeling so helpless standing before her watching her cry. "What's wrong?" she hissed. "Well, I'm glad you're happy and enjoying yourself, but because while you're here playing baseball, your father is in the hospital in critical condition," she barked and walked away. "Tommy, what's a critical condition mean?" "I don't know, Joey. Hey, you gonna bat? It's getting late." Yeah, I began, when I saw Sister Eugene Catherine leaving the convent across the street from the empty lot where we played baseball and head for the side door of St. Elizabeth's Church. This led into the sacristy, where I had spent many hours the past 4 years as an altar boy, laying out the priest's vestments and preparing the altar for Mass, which was said in Latin in those years. "Sister Eugene," I cried out, dropping the bat and dashing across the street and down the alleyway between the school and rectory. The St. Elizabeth complex of church, school, rectory, and convent was laid out to form a perfect square, the church and school facing Atlantic Avenue and Ozone Park, the convent and rectory directly in the rear of each. Sister Eugene instinctively opened her arms, and I ducked within their welcome embrace. Burying my face between the soft warmth of her breasts, smelling the clean black and white linen habit I had come to associate with love and safety for the past 2 years. "Hush now, Joesph, hush," she cooed, rocking me gently to that soft melodic voice that had first attracted me to her, and with which she led our choir so adroitly. A hummingbird's voice, which I never heard duplicated, but I am reminded of each time I hear Anne Murray sing Snowbird. I had fallen in love with Sister Eugene. After 6 years of poor marks and daily fistfights after school in the lot across the street, I suddenly became an altar boy in her class, the 6th and 7th grades. I also became, in her words, her little lover, in a very real sense. And even now, so many years later, I do not speak in hypocritical indignation or condemnation of Sister Eugene's action, but solely with warmth and a lasting affection for the moments we shared together. If anything, I can now better understand the needs, quote unquote, of a healthy, beautiful woman in her early 30s in conflict with her natural physical and human proclivities, while trying desperately to adhere to the vows of an unnatural vocation made so by man. I have never believed that loving another person or oneself is in conflict with one's love for one's creator. For such union was the very purpose of our creation as separate and unique genders. Any man or woman can serve God's children without such unnatural sacrifice being imposed upon them in this day of enlightenment, as can be attested to by the decimated pool of girls for sisterhood and the given fact that priesthood has become a vocation where latent homosexuals can ply their assorted deviations behind the guise of the cloth, particularly on unsuspecting boys in awe of their godlike authority. Marriage would alleviate the need for perfectly decent young men and women to fulfill their worldly needs of the flesh by having to sneak upon in the shadow like some leper or religious felon. Personally, I would scoff at the thought of some who think that I was taking unfair advantage due to my still tender age. At the age of 12 and 13, a young boy is in his birth stages of transition to manhood and in search of his own sexuality. This happened to be a stage in my life when the simple, vibrant humming of a bus ride or strong wind against my pants front was sufficient to induce lasting, painful erections that I needed to work off, whether it was by mounting or rubbing against a pillow in the dark night until I experienced that frightening but glorious release, or by rubbing myself against a table, doorknob, or whatever was available. So I was not exactly a wide-eyed hayseed to my dilemma, and if I was a victim, I was certainly happy as a pig in shit to be one. I had always been the class clown, shooting spitballs and pulling the hair of the girls seated in front of me. I was a sharpshooter when it came to hitting kids in the ass with my rubber band and paper clips while they were working on the blackboard and the sister's head was momentarily turned. The normal punitive measure for such an infraction of the rules was to have a kid stand in the corner of the classroom facing the wall for hours. But even when I was caught red-handed and accorded this punishment, Sister Eugene saw how I continued to disrupt the class by making faces or sticking my tongue out at the girls and boys who were giggling at my predicament. She wasn't having any of this and ordered me to get under the opening of the huge oak desk at which she sat facing the class and that had a completely closed front that settled on the plank wooden floor. "I'm not going to," I started to protest until I saw the angry glint in her eyes. I scurried like a little rodent to obey. Having been raised in a strict Catholic family, I dare not go home with a report stating I had disobeyed or been disrespectful to a nun. I'd have been better off running away from home or simply placing a gun to my head and getting it over with quickly. In my parents' eyes, it would have been as much a sacrilege as spitting in God's face. Sitting in the semi-darkness with the back against the inside of the wooden desk front, I was pondering my latest debacle when, to my dismay, shock, and finally petrified fright, I saw Sister Eugene sitting in the semi-darkness with my back against the inside of the wooden desk front. I was pondering my latest debacle when, to my dismay, shock, and petrified fright, I saw Sister Eugene from the waist down standing in front of me, gather her black habit and rosary beads in her hands, lifting them to just below the knees, before she sat down and pulled herself and the chair beneath the desk. What nice legs, I thought. And that was my last thought before scuttling backward in stark horror away from the sacred relics, mashed back against the desk front, knees tightly drawn up under my chin. Oh my God, oh shit, my mind screamed. I moaned softly in pain 15 minutes later, just knowing my spine would snap like a piece of peanut brittle if I held this excruciating position a moment longer. Finally, I dared to slide my ass forward on the splintery floor to take some of the weight off my lower back. "Joesph," came the sharp, authoritarian voice from heaven above. "Stop moving around under there. Be still." This, of course, brought a titter of laughter from the kids who cruelly revel in the humiliation of others. "Sons of bitches," I cursed under my breath. "I'll get you," I vowed silently, groggily, before my head fell forward on Sister Eugene's lap in a dead sleep, my arms unknowingly wrapped around her black cotton-clad legs. I could have barely been asleep minutes when I awoke in the state of arousal, thanks to the feather-like touch of Sister Eugene's hand, whose fingers ran gently through my hair and caressed my back and face in a symphony of erotic delight. My cheek lies shockingly against the warm, velvety softness of her inner thigh, chin resting on the roll of cotton just inches above her knee, secured in place in her elastic garter. Breathlessly, I did not flinch or move away from her loving touch. Instead, shivering in this sweet agony of sexual awakening, reacted instinctively upon smelling the unique essence of a woman and paid homage to my exotic antagonist by kissing and licking her thighs in the ancient rote inbred in man. My heart beat wildly as I dared to slide my hands beneath her hiked-up gown, feeling her wiggle to give my hands access to her full, soft buttocks, which I clung to like a drowning man and kneaded in rhythm to my lips that worked like some carnivorous animal against the moist, fragrant mound on her cotton-encased vagina. My body went perfectly still in wonder as Sister Eugene's hands clasped tightly behind my head and her body began to twitch convulsively, lasting only a few short moments. Then suddenly, pushing me away and lowering her gown at the same time, sitting frightened once again, I listened to the hoarse voice of a stranger dismiss the children for lunch hour. I think you've been under there long enough, Joesph. You may come out," she said, though in a not unkindly manner as she pushed away from the desk and allowed me to stagger from my cave into the bright, blinding light of the classroom, aware of the sticky wetness on my pants. Sister Eugene?" I was tongue-tied. "It's all right, Joesph," she whispered softly, her back to me as she wrote on the blackboard. "Thank you, but I hope this will be our secret." Sure, Sister Eugene, I would never." "Yes, it's our secret," I vowed and wanted to add, "I love you, Sister Eugene," but just stumbled out of the classroom and school into a seemingly less mysterious world. For the next few weeks, Sister Eugene barely spoke to me, unless it was in direct relation to a study lesson. I didn't look at her for fear she would read lascivious thoughts, but my manner in the classroom became more subdued and studious, which the other kids attributed to my recent humiliation, a lesson learned. One afternoon in the schoolyard, situated between the church and the school, Sister Eugene approached and beckoned me from where I was standing with my friends. Her eyes were a deep blue-green, I first noticed beneath silky eyebrows of strawberry blonde. Her sharp features would have been patrician were it not for the full-blown, sharply defined lips of her mouth that exposed the white pearls of perfect teeth when she smiled. "Joesph, are you listening to me?" she smiled coyly. I thought how she would always be my favorite penguin, an affectionate name for sisters of the Dominican order due to their black and white habits. "I said," she continued, "that I was talking to your mother. My heart flipped yesterday, and she was telling me you had a wonderful voice, which you never told me. I had hoped that you might give consideration to joining our choir group. Would you, Joesph? Gee, Sister Eugene, I blushed. I don't know. I love to, but with my Sunday masses, sometimes morning masses, and now the Stations of the Cross during Lent, I don't know how I... Well, she interrupted, I'll just have to speak to the Monsignor. We have more than enough altar boys, but far too few good voices in our choir. What do you think of that, Joesph? She smiled, melting me completely. Yeah, I beamed. I'd like that. Good, it's settled. Practices are Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays in the choir loft. I had always had a pretty good falsetto tenor voice as a young boy and sang such Irish songs as Danny Boy and My Wild Irish Rose whenever we had family gatherings for the holidays and other occasions. That is, until my voice changed at 17 years of age and I awoke one morning in the sound of a frog emanating from my throat, my boyhood behind me. So at that early stage of my life, I became the proud star of Sister Eugene's popularly acclaimed choir, singing not only with the choir for Sunday Mass, but singing solo from atop the choir loft while she accompanied me at the organ. I could really hit and hold the notes in those days. I especially loved Midnight Mass on Christmas Eve, my highlight being that I was given the chance to sing my two favorite songs, Our Father, having been a great admirer of Mario Lanza, and O Come, O Ye Faithful, which I would sing in Latin as Adeste Fidelis. Both songs gave me goosebumps, and I derived a great deal of spiritual gratification. Both songs gave me goosebumps, and I derived a great deal of spiritual gratification whenever I felt I had done these beautiful songs to a degree of musical justice, and such affirmation came solely in a nod or smile of approval from my mentor, Sister Eugene. During our weekday practices, Sister Eugene would run over to the convent and change into her lightweight working smock with a matching white Arafat-type headdress. It only increased her ethereal beauty. After each session with the other boys, she would keep me behind so we could work on my quote-unquote solos together in an undisturbed harmony after locking the stairwell door so that the intrusive eyes of the enemy were not offended by our innocent human frailties. To my trembling delight, she would shed the headdress and allow me to run my fingers through her choppy reddish blonde hair as she disrobed me and introduced me to heaven's true wonders. But the main course came when we would lie back on the thickly carpeted floor of the choir loft, and she would allow me to feast my eyes on the virtual forest of fiery red pubic hair between her wantonly spread thighs, where I bowed and knelt at the altar of her womanhood and lost all sense of time, hearing nothing but her keening impassioned pleas and loving praise as we basked in the scented delight of the human body. But all that, and life as I had known it then, had come to an end with my mother's foreboding words, "Your father is in critical condition. You must be strong, Joesph, for God has this reason for the life he gives us, just as he does when he chooses to bring us back home to his kingdom." Sister Eugene whispered softly, holding me tightly into the middle of the deserted schoolyard. "But it isn't fair," I protested angrily. "It never is, Joesph. It never is." She sighed. "Maybe everything will turn out all right. But please remember, whatever happens and wherever you might go in life, my love and my prayers go with you." She choked tears running down her beautiful cheeks. "I love you, Joesph." "And I love you, Sister Eugene," I uttered to my own shock and amazement, before spinning away and running from the schoolyard, never to see her again. I attempted to do so many years later, only to be told by my new Mother Superior, after flipping through pages of a huge logbook, that Sister Eugene Catherine had been transferred out to an unrecorded location in 1953, just months after I had run from the schoolyard. Forest Park, Queens, New York. Damn, I thought, it's starting to get cold. It must be at least 3 o'clock by now. My sister Ellen should be coming home from work. I walked up the embankment, stopping at the top to look down at the fishing hole one more time. Maybe it will fill up again. Why does everything have to change? Maybe we'll have some rainstorms and maybe it will fill up again. But then I remembered that all the catfish and thousands of little guppies that used to live there, I realized that even if it did fill up, it would never be the same again. They're gone and can't come back. As I walked down Woodhaven Boulevard to meet my sister, I wondered who was looking for me. I knew the MPs would be, but I wasn't worried about them. Most of them were my age and not exactly what one could think of as mental giants. Because if they were, they would have set the ring of MPs on the other side of the river as a precautionary measure, and also a Coast Guard boat patrolling the water. If they had either one, I couldn't have gotten away. Maybe the CID will be called in. I don't know what their function is exactly, but this could concern them. But I didn't have much respect for them either, knowing what one had to do to go through just a pair of government-issued socks. They couldn't be much more progressive in their methods. Besides, I've only been gone about 12 hours, and they couldn't possibly have gotten so far in their investigation where they would be thinking of me trying to meet my sister coming home from work. But I better keep my eyes open just the same. I was standing on the corner of Jamaica Avenue, waiting for the light to change, when out of the corner of my eye I saw a car suddenly slow down. It was a gray Chevy. The guy in the passenger seat was turned completely around, looking back in my direction. But then it took off again. Was that guy looking at me? There were 5 or 6 other people standing behind me who were waiting for the bus. The car did have an aerial, though. Detectives? Nah, those fools would have jumped from the car shouting. Anybody they catch, it is rarely through intelligent investigation work, but either through an informer or criminal's own stupidity. So when they sat their eyes on their prey, the morons go all out, insensitive to any bystanders who are unfortunate enough to be in the line of fire, knowing in their hearts this was it. For due to their lack of training and limited intelligence on a whole, there was no second chance for them. I shrugged off the bad feeling and kept walking. When I reached Atlantic Avenue, I took my position and stood between the 2 garages. From that vantage point, I would be able to see the 2 possible routes my sister could take. I recognized her when she was still 3 blocks away, but I didn't want to walk out in the wide open boulevard to meet her. When she was only about 10 yards away from me, I stepped out in front of her. "Hi, Ellen," I said as she came up to me. "Joe, what are you doing around here?" she said immediately. "They're looking for you." She looked around worriedly in all directions. "Come on, take it easy, Ellen. Let's walk. Who's looking for me? The MPs? Detectives?" I asked, not overly concerned. "No, Joe. I was talking to Mom on the phone from work. Mom told me they were asking all kinds of questions about you. Where'd you go? Things like that. They even asked about me. They wanted to know what time I got off of work." "Who are they, Ellen?" I asked. But I already knew. Gray Chevys, they all drove them. "The FBI, Joe. You better go." It was too late. I turned around just slightly, enough to see the gray Chevy coming up on the inside lane slowly. I felt like I was going to throw up. "What's wrong, Joe?" Ellen asked worriedly, seeing my features change. "Maybe I could still make it. The feds will let a guy get away before opening fire around innocent people. They know there's a tomorrow for them. But God, suppose they did fire. Get out of here, Ellen. Go home," I pleaded with my lovely red-headed sister. "No," her lips trembled. "I won't leave you." "All right, Ellen. Just walk then. Everything's going to be all right," I said as the gray Chevy slowly passed along the curb, coming to a stop about 30 yards ahead. There were 4 guys inside who never glanced our way. The 2 guys that I saw in the other car must be behind us. 3 of the men got out of the car in front of us as Ellen and I closed the distance to about 20 yards. They waved to the driver as he slowly passed away. They waved to the driver as he slowly pulled away. They were laughing and joking with each other. When they were about 10 yards away from us, they began to close in, never looking our way. I stopped and stepped away from my sister. "That's them, Ellen. Please go." "Joe," she started. "Hold it, Sullivan!" one screamed as they all rushed toward me with their guns drawn. They grabbed me, and as they lifted me parallel to the ground, they began to frisk me. He's clean. One spoke to another, snapped the cuffs on me. The second car had pulled right behind us. My heart hurt seeing my sister standing there frightened for me, crying brokenly. I'm all right, Ellen. I tried to comfort her as they were putting me in the car. One of the agents was real decent. When he saw that my sister was completely distraught as she stood on the sidewalk, he got out of the front seat, telling the driver to wait a few minutes, and calmed her down. He assured her that everything would be all right. They were mainly concerned about the whereabouts of the knife, which didn't mean anything to me. So I took them up to Forest Park where they recovered it. They treated me pretty good while they held me in the federal building in Manhattan, where I waited for the army official to come for me. These men left a lasting impression on me. Not so much that of an odd young man, though I did feel a certain admiration, but my impression was one of respect for the dignity with which they carried themselves, and more so the sensitivity they showed toward the few prisoners I'd watched them escort in and out of the different offices for questioning. No loudmouth bluster, no threats and cursing, no blackjack sticking out of every pocket of blood-stained floors. I thought I was sitting in some Wall Street office. My captors were young college-type executives. They were dangerous just the same, more mentally than physically. They did not ask one question without a well-thought-out reason for asking it. They won't ask one blunt question for an answer, but instead will ask 100 seemingly harmless questions and piece together their own answers and conclusions. I've known quite a few of these guys who had done federal time, and they all said the same thing. Sully, these guys treat you pretty decent, but don't let them engage you in a seemingly routine conversation, even if they only want to talk about the weather. As I sat there drinking, a young boyish-looking agent walked in. You're Sullivan, huh? He asked good-naturedly, giving me the once-over, then sitting down across from me. You know who's coming for you? No, sir. I guess the MPs or somebody. He laughed, saying, not a chance. This calls for a general, kid. You're a celebrity. A general? I stuttered. Yep, the whole works, he said, becoming serious. Did you really swim that freezing river, kid? Yes, sir. What happened to the life preserver you took from the boat on the island side? He asked, holding me with his steady eye. I don't know. I lost it when I first started out on the other side. I know, he laughed again. We found it. The dirty bastard, I thought. Listen, kid, if you decide to do it again, give us a call, okay? He smiled. What for? I asked, not knowing what he was getting at. No, he threw up his hands. I don't want to arrest you. I just want to watch you, okay? He chuckled. Yeah, okay, I chuckled back. After all the hullabaloo was over, I was escorted down to the waiting cars. Trailing behind me were a general, a colonel, and 3 MPs. Naturally, I was cuffed. They said they didn't want to cuff me, but I felt I still had a lot of rabbit in my blood. It was dark as we left the federal building, heading for the South Street. It was dark when we left the federal building, heading for South Street to get to the Governor's Island ferry. I was just beginning to realize that I was captured and where they were taking me. I was really feeling evil and was already beginning to think of my next escape plan. Listen, son, the general was speaking in that condescending tone. It isn't over yet. You can still make a good soldier. The army needs men like you. You've had a good record other than this incident. I see no reason why we can't straighten this out. He smiled at me, looking very proud of himself. Sir, I don't want to stay in the army, I said with a politeness that I didn't feel. What? He blustered. Don't you know what we can do with you, boy? Why, we... Fuck you! And fuck the army, General! I hissed, glaring back into his shocked face. That's no way to talk to a the colonel began to defensively say. Fuck you too, mister. The colonel raised his hand to slap me. Colonel, this boy is obviously sick. I think we've said enough, sighed the general. We rode the rest of the way to the ferry in complete silence. I was feeling very bad for having cursed them out, and worse for not knowing how to apologize to them. They were only trying to help me, but shit, I said. Didn't I? It's too late to apologize. It's too late to apologize. They would never be able to forget my words. The hell with it, I thought. I was thrown into segregation, which was actually a tin box with a slot in it for food to be passed through. I was up there for about 6 days when my sergeant friend from the kitchen came up to see me. He gave me cigarettes and matches and informed me that I would probably be court-martialed and sent to Leavenworth, the federal prison in Kansas. He figured the best thing I could do was bug out and try to get into the hospital. This way, when they did bring me back, they couldn't try me. That's if I didn't get a discharge from the hospital first. About 3 o'clock that morning, I woke up every living ass on Governor's Island. I set my mattress on fire, smashed the thick glass covering my light bulb, then commenced kicking on the tin wall and screaming at the top of my lungs until the building shook. I guess that I would have had to be half a nut to go through this shit anyway. So I really got in the groove until I believed I was for real. A male nurse came into the cell behind 6 MPs, grunting and cursing, trying to hold me down while the nurse popped me with a needle. They didn't want to hurt me, but subdue me, but I could see that they were becoming extremely angry. "Shit, man, just knock the little bastard out," one of the guys grunted sourly. That's when I decided to poop out and then let them do their thing. The following morning when I woke up, I was immediately taken to the psychologist. I giggled incoherently for the 2 hours I spent with him. When he got on the phone, whispering low and secretively, smiling at me as I giggled and waved at him from where I sat on the floor in the far corner of his office, I thought I had made it. But when 2 MPs came in and led me out of the office, I figured I had blown my screen test. Back to the box, I thought mournfully. But there it was, sitting right at the curb waiting for me with a long, shiny town and brown army ambulance. They had me strapped down on a stretcher inside the ambulance in a matter of seconds. I was saying, "Hi, how are you?" to everybody like I was the Democratic candidate for mayor of New York. The psychiatrist got into the ambulance and held my hand, and we giggled together like morons all the way up to the Valley Forge Army Hospital in Pennsylvania. Wow, I thought as we rolled up outside the gates to the hospital grounds. This looks like a country club. Spacious green lawns, beautiful trees, beautiful army and civilian nurses running around. This is gonna be all right. And it was, but giggling to myself every time I heard footsteps became tiresome real quick. After about 30 days, I began to ease out of my bag gradually. Unfortunately, the medical personnel began to see through my smokescreen of insanity. One day, I was called before a panel of the psychiatric department and deemed sane. They didn't want to give me a medical discharge because that would hold the Army responsible for me. Instead, they decided to give me a bad conduct discharge and sent me back to Governor's Island to muster out. Attica, 1971, 9:20 a.m. A shrill whistle brought me quickly to a crouch from where I lay in the coal pile, protected from view by the railroad tracks that ran in from the rear gate to the prison. Mike wouldn't have whistled unless something was wrong. I watched him bending down as if to tie his shoelaces. What was wrong? The guard walked out from behind the front of the building and glanced in the direction of the coal pile. I swore he had looked right into my eyes, but he kept walking to the gate that led to the yard of the powerhouse. Swinging it shut, he snapped the padlock on it. This gate was supposed to be locked at all times, but since garbage trucks came through pretty regularly, it was much easier for the guards to leave it open. They didn't like having to walk from the powerhouse to the gate every time a truck came. But why lock it today? My mind raced. Do they know something? Did they miss me already and know I'm here? He's going back inside now. He didn't even glance my way. Nothing about him looks like he's onto something. Mike was standing with his broom again, like some cigar store Indian. "How long have you been there, Mike? 1,000 years? 920. I brought the watch to my ear. It's still working. I could tell by the second hand. God damn, you're a genius, Sully. Take it easy. Breathe deeply. You gotta be cool. It could be any second now. Come on, you've got to laugh. What on this earth is worth being serious about? You're 32 years old and haven't lived at all. But you have lived. Look at these poor bastards in Vietnam. Kids, 17 and 18 years old, getting whacked out and never knowing what for. You've lived double their lifespan already, and you're a criminal. Where's the justice in that? Shit. I take one of those kids' places in a hot second. At least I'd have a shot of getting laid before I die. If the government cared at all about those kids, then why don't they let so-called waste products like us replace them and let those kids live, go to college, marry their childhood sweethearts, and really be all that they can be? All they can be in the army is filler for body bags. But then I forget about the black and white hat philosophy, the good guys and the bad guys. The so-called criminal type isn't supposed to have the courage to fight. Try telling that to a French legionnaire. But shit, the only way I could fight in that political war is if they imported it. Prisons, like drugs, have become a major industry. People have got to have jobs and need clowns like myself to fill the human warehouses. But those kids, half of them, who never had the chance to get laid yet, are expendable pawns to political prostitutes who have dodged the draft themselves and never had a bloody nose in their lives. I'd love to see half of those so-called hawks, boy killers, on their bony knees, scurrying down Pennsylvania Avenue like the low-life rodents they are. At one time, it took a man to speak for his people, but now all it takes is a snake. And the more powerful a politician, the higher he climbs, the bigger snake he is. Nice guys do not have the imbued sense of immorality to compete. As a country, we're all holding on desperately now. Even the simplest of men and women sense this. Just think, Joe, if you stayed in the army, you'd probably be dead by now anyway. So this shit here is a small thing. I fought in the battles of Trenton, Rahway, Sing Sing, Attica, and almost got killed in those places a few times. Some of those naive kids got a better shot at surviving Nam than they would if they've been in these jungles. Geez, I feel faint. Can't even keep my eyes open. Some tough guy you are, Sully. I smiled as I drifted away from my immediate plight.